because of our different communication styles and our patterns and the way we perceive things, we just maybe not be able to make that connection. So I always say, if I'm talking English and somebody else is talking Chinese, we may never, even though we want to say the same things, we may never get to understand each other because we can't quite get the language right. And so those are the reasons why we have to learn a lot of this, so that we can start to say, wow, wait a second, just because I'm saying it one way, you're saying it the other, we're communicating, but the communication isn't breaking through. How do we break through? How do we get to where we can really heal ourselves, get through these things, and have a really good connection where we have a partner in life that we're able to share our lives with it in a way that's healthy and good and stronger, not combative, man. There's no, and it's not to say that every day's perfect, but when we have issues, we have tools now to handle and work through those issues in a healthy manner, compared to the old style where I didn't have the tools necessary to get through it at all. So I was very fortunate that things developed so crazily and in such a severe pattern that it opened my eyes to so much. I had to take ownership, and my wife also took a lot of ownership too. Yeah, she continued to do a lot of her own healing, a lot of her childhood trauma work. And at the end of the 4 months, one of the things she said to me is that I was her mirror. Everything she thought was wrong with me were actually all the things that were wrong with her.
Welcome to the 1000 Days Sober podcast. My name is Lee Davy. I am not an alcoholic. I refuse to be anonymous. I am someone who lives a self-led life, alcohol-free as fuck, and I spend every waking moment of that life helping other people do the same. Today, our special guest is Bryan Power, a man who turned the darkest chapters of his marriage into a masterclass in emotional healing and radical responsibility. In early 2024, Bryan's wife filed a restraining order against him for her emotional safety. No violence, no infidelity, just two wounded people trapped in the chaos of their unhealed childhood patterns. What followed was a total breakdown, but then a rebuild. Bryan discovered the integrated attachment theory framework, learned how to take full ownership of his side of the street, and in doing so, rebuilt not only his marriage, but also his relationship with himself. Today, we talk about what happens when you stop trying to fix your partner and start taking 100% responsibility for your own behavior. We unpack the difference between anxious, avoidant, and fearful attachment styles, and how these subconscious patterns shape the way we fight, love, and communicate. We also explore how childhood trauma plays out in adult relationships, why one person doing the work can transform the entire dynamic, and how parenting through our wounds can either repeat our past or rewrite it. If you have ever felt trapped in a cycle of blame, disconnection, or emotional chaos in your relationship, then this conversation will give you both the tools and the hope to start again. It's never over until it's over. Okay, without further ado, I'll shut the hell up and leave you in the capable hands of the beautiful, the majestic, the awesome Bryan Power. How you doing, Bryan?
Good. How are you, Lee?
I am fandabidozy, as they say in the UK. Where do you live, Bryan?
I'm in the Boston area here in the US.
Oh, nice. So let's just jump straight into it. No holds barred.
All right.
So your wife filed a restraining order against you for emotional safety. First of all, that must have been very, very difficult. What was going on there? How did it get to that point, Bryan? And then we'll talk about how we saved it. But how did it get to that point?
Yeah, Lee, crazy. A lot of childhood trauma was basically playing out in our lives. And we had some relationship issues along the way, like a lot of couples will do. We had some arguments here, little differences now and then, but never really seemed like it was out of control or anything too, severe. It wasn't there were no financial issues. There wasn't any drug abuse or infidelity, anything like that, But early 2024, we would have another fight about parenting styles, or parenting was a little bit different. And my wife at that point, she would challenge me to see a therapist. And I was like, okay, well, you know what? I'm game. I'm willing to learn and see if I can, figure something out here. But I also challenged her to see a therapist too, because in my mind, she was the one with all the problems, right? And in her mind, I was the one with all the problems. And so the first thing I learned about, healing and relationships and all that stuff is we have to take ownership of our own crap, and that was the thing. So we both began to take some ownership. Which was a good thing. But it was also starting to trigger some of our emotions as we were getting some healing. My wife was seeing a childhood trauma specialist. That was actually triggering some additional emotions. And our relationship would just devolve over the next 4 months into just an emotional chaos. And ultimately leading to her putting a restraining order against me for emotional safety, never physical violence. I never threatened my wife. I'm not that kind of guy. But the emotional chaos and turmoil between us led us to, let her to hit the wall, if you will, and put a restraining order against me. And at that point, I figured the relationship is over. It's done. I've got to move on with my life. I just didn't know how to fix this, didn't know how to change it. I figured it's over. And that's just that. But, as fate would have it, I was able to kind of learn some things and over the next few months, and life would take us in a different path. And ultimately, we're able to come back around and put this thing back together. So,
well, thank you for sharing that, Bryan. A couple of things that I'd like you to go a little bit deeper on there. This weekend, church, actually, on Sunday, I was in church on Sunday, and I was talking to a friend of mine about this kind of stuff, relationships, and he was saying, I just wish she would go see someone. Like I was saying to him, maybe you need to do a bit of work. And he's like, no. She's the one who needs to go to do some work. No, it's not me. Like if she fixes herself, we're good. Like it's not me, it's her. Talk a little bit about that trap.
yeah, that is the big trap, I think, and that's the big one. I work with a woman named Tice Gibson. She's the one that teaches the integrated attachment theory program, and the thing I love what she says is we are both 100% responsible for our 50% of the relationship. And so we have to take ownership, look at ourselves and realize, what am I doing? What is it that I'm doing? What am I bringing to the table? And how am I acting or reacting in ways that could be actually, hurting my spouse? But unfortunately, I think a lot of times we don't understand the dynamics of the other person because they come from a different mindset. Sometimes they're different perspective a little bit, and our inability to look at that differently and see their side of it a lot of times causes us to just sit back in our own thoughts, our own mind, and think that we've got it figured out and our way is right. And then everything that isn't our way, our thoughts, is obviously wrong, right? There's no way. So it can't be me. It's definitely them. And so that's the first step, is we, especially as men, especially as you mentioned going to church. I'm a man of faith myself. I truly believe we have to take ownership of our own stuff and really, take the lead on this and be willing to say, like, wait a second. It's not all them. How am I showing up? What can I do differently to change the dynamics of this? And what I learned a lot about was really the subconscious, and how the subconscious wounds from our childhoods really, and those patterns have developed in a way that's now unhealthy and not really helping this relationship to develop in a really great way. And it's preventing us from having that great connection and that great relationship with our spouses that we ultimately all want to have. Nobody gets, falls in love, gets married, kind of goes down this path thinking, 5-10 years later, we're going to hate each other and we're going to be at each other's throats, if you will, because we don't know how to connect. We don't know how to discuss things. We don't know how to, get through this stuff. Nobody starts that journey thinking they're going to end there, but that's where we end because of our inability to learn along the way, figure these things out. We let our patterns, we let our mindset get stubborn and stuck in our own thoughts. And we've got to change that. We've got to be willing to look at ourselves and start taking stock of and ownership of our own issues and learn how to figure this out. And that's one of the things I was very fortunate to do because of the severity of our relationship breakdown. The way it happened, I was able to see a lot of those things. And I thank God every day that I was, and that things kind of devolved to where they were. Because now we were able to look at it differently, a little bit more clearly, and get a lot of different perspective on it. And I have a lot more relationship tools today that I didn't have back then that allowed me to, have a better relationship with my wife today. So
There's in the strike community, the one that I have, where I help people to become alcohol free and live a more conscious life, I always lead with taking 100% responsibility. I'm a bit of a framework man, right? Like I love framework. So framework for me is 100% responsibility. So if I have a big fight with my wife, for example, I'll probably blame her. I want to be right. We'll have a big fight. But then afterwards, I'll come back. I'll take care of my nervous system. And then I'll say to myself, okay, Lee, how can you take 100% responsibility for your part of what just happened, right? But I do have people in my community who don't just get triggered by this. They think that it is harmful. So they're thinking about, no, this person really harm me, maybe physically harm me, sexually harm me, psychologically harm me. There's no way that I should take responsibility. And I'm always trying to teach, we're not on doormat. We're not abrogating responsibility. We're taking responsibility for our part. Can you just talk about that a little bit? Because I do know that a lot of people have a lot of resistance to this when it comes to getting involved in the weeds of, no, my perpetrator is responsible, not me.
Yeah, I mean, I love the work you're doing and getting people to be alcohol free and drug free and all that other stuff. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. You know, my father was an addict, battled addiction. My parents were divorced when I was born. My mom was a single mom with two kids, two boys. You know, trying to raise two kids in the '70s, and moved around a lot. And so there was just a lot of turmoil, a lot of chaos, a lot of that dysfunctional stuff going on. And this was my introduction to the world and how relationships work and how life works. And so my perception on life became very distorted, right? And so that was the way I kind of traveled through life. And as I became a man myself and entered into relationships, I was struggling because I had no idea how to do them. And all those childhood wounds that were playing out in my brain were ruining my relationships. And I didn't know how to fix them because I had no tools and didn't know how to do that. But at the end of the day, I'm not responsible really for what happened to me as a child, but at this point, I have to take ownership of the way I'm now acting and the way things are I'm now becoming my parents, right? Even though I've worked so hard not to be in so many ways, I find that in many ways I still am. I am as dysfunctional as them sometimes. And all those wounds that they, felt in their childhoods and that they played out, as parents against my brother and I, if you will, now I'm carrying them into my adult life. And so I've got to take ownership of that and say, you know what, it may not be my fault that I have these wounds, but it is my responsibility to now fix them. And if I don't fix them, I am going to continue to ruin my own life and ruin the lives of others and hurt people along the way. And so it's very important that we take ownership of our own crap and start to look at ourselves and say, what is wrong with me? What are some of the things that I'm doing wrong? What are some of the perceptions that I have that may not be really serving me properly and really kind of moving the needle forward so that I can have a really great life? We're only hurting ourselves by sitting back and saying, well, it's not me. It's not me. You're hurting yourself. That's the reality. First, you're hurting yourself first and foremost. But then, yes, we do have overflow where we are hurting other people too. But at the end of the day, we're hurting ourselves and we deserve better than that. And we can have better, but we've got to be willing to humble ourselves and say, you know what? I've got some issues. I do some things differently. I want to learn a different way to do this and see a better way through so that, all of a sudden those subconscious tapes, I'm able to now, do these things in a better way. And it starts to, take shape in your life. And all of a sudden you wake up and you go, wow, wait a second. The relationship I have today with my wife is 1,000 times better than I had, maybe 3 months, 6 months, a year ago. Why? Because I've learned some new ways and I'm not stubborn and stuck in my old thought patterns that were destroying myself and my wife and my family. How stubborn are we? How foolish are we to think that way, that we're not responsible or it's always the other person? Like, I just, no, let's take some ownership. Let's move the needle forward and start doing that. And I promise your spouse comes along too. So a lot of times they want the same thing. They want a great relationship. They want to heal and be heard and have, their wounds kind of dealt with and all that stuff. So it's incredible when you do it. And I promise you it's a lot better than staying stuck and stubborn, for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bryan. I just want to put a caveat in here. Everybody knows relationships are very, very complicated, right? But just to use a very polarized black and white example for this that I use with clients, imagine I'm in a relationship and my wife comes in the kitchen, I've loaded the dishwasher wrong, and she punches me in the face, right? Right? And I punch her back. Okay. Now, when it comes to taking responsibility, I can look myself in the mirror and I can say, my dad told me never to hit a woman. I just hit a woman for the first time in my life. I'm not that guy. I do not hit women, right? Like, I can go back to her and say, hey, yesterday when you punched me in the face and I punched you back, I am so sorry that I punched you. I need you to be in a relationship so I'm taking my responsibility for my actions. I'm not saying anything about her punching me. If I have a problem with her punching me, then I'll leave the relationship, which is also me taking responsibility, right? I'm not saying it's okay for her to punch me. I'm just clearing my shit. And as I'm clearing my shit, I could say to her as a request, in future, I don't want physical violence in our relationship. In future, if you hit me, I won't hit you back, but I will leave the relationship. And that is the consequences of this. That to me is like okay, I'm just making it up, right? But that's what I'm talking about when we take responsibility. You concur with that, Bryan?
Yeah, I always say, the way somebody else acts tells you everything about them. The way we act tells them everything they need to know about us. Okay. And so, and we can say react, but that's the key word there is act. We're still acting. And so the way we act, whether we're acting or reacting, doesn't matter. We have to take ownership of that and how we're behaving in that manner. And we can't blame and say, well, it's because of this person. I acted this way because of that. And you can come up with a million excuses as to why you're acting like a jerk. Let's be honest, right? Because that allows you to never take ownership of your own actions. So, yeah, 100%, man. I love that. 100% take the ownership and take ownership of your own actions first and foremost.
So I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, when you started taking 100% responsibility for your part of the relationship, um, did your wife do the same? And what was there a part of the process where she wasn't, and and you started to get angry because you was?
No, yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of funny because our relationship just devolved. So through that 4 months, we had about 4 months of the relationship just devolving. And once she put a restraining order against me, I was not able to contact her at all. It was one of these things you can't communicate at all, zero. And so at that point, it was in my brain, the relationship was over. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew there were some issues. I knew my issues were coming to the forefront. I had a lot of abandonment wounds, a lot of fear, unsafety, all these things were playing out. And so it was obvious that I had some issues, but I was fortunate enough to come across the integrated attachment theory program about a month before I got thrown out of the house. That began to give me some tools, and I was excited about that. So I just continued to focus on healing myself, moving through that, believing that I was going to learn some things that was going to allow me to have a better relationship with somebody. I didn't know it would be my wife again. I didn't know we'd have a second chance at that. I just assumed, hey, I'm going to have a chance to have a relationship with somebody again in the future. I want to make sure that I'm prepared and can do a better job for that. And so I just continued down that work and decided to go headstrong into that. And I loved it. The work itself kind of gave me a lot of tools that I'd never had before, a lot of awarenesses. I became very aware of the different attachment styles and how, I can perceive something one way and my spouse can perceive it a different way, how we communicate differently. We may be trying to say the same exact thing, but because of our different communication styles and our patterns and the way we perceive things, we just maybe not be able to make that connection. So I always say, if I'm talking English and somebody else is talking Chinese, we may never, even though we want to say the same things, we may never get to understand each other because we can't quite get the language right. And so those are the reasons why we have to learn a lot of this so that we can start to say, wow, wait a second, just because I'm saying it one way, you're saying it the other, we're communicating, but the communication isn't breaking through. How do we break through? How do we get to where we can really heal ourselves, get through these things and have a really good connection where we have a partner in life that we're able to share our lives with it in a way that's healthy and good and stronger, not combative, man. There's no, it's not to say that every day's perfect, but when we have issues, we have tools now to handle and work through those issues in a healthy manner compared to the old style where I didn't have the tools necessary to get through it, at all. So I was very fortunate that things devolved so crazily and in such a severe pattern that it opened my eyes to so much. I had to take ownership, and my wife also took a lot of ownership too. Yeah, she continued to do a lot of her own healing, a lot of her childhood trauma work. And at the end of the 4 months, one of the things she said to me is that I was her mirror. Everything she thought was wrong with me were actually all the things that were wrong with her. And vice versa. A lot of the things I was looking at her, her issues were really my own issues. And so a lot of times I think we do have a spouse in our lives to teach us the things we hate about the other person sometimes. A lot of times that's our own issues that we need to look at. And so that's one thing I learned for sure is some of those things that you're thinking that is everybody else, it's really yourself. Take a look.
How many kids you got?
I have a 14-year-old stepdaughter now, and we have a 5.5-year-old son together.
So, you get kicked out of the house. Things, you're in this kind of like closed loop where nothing seems. You probably love her, and she probably loves you, but you just can't get your shit together.
Yeah.
And you leave. You got no home. You got no contact with your wife. Kids is probably really difficult as well.
I couldn't even see my kids either.
Yeah. What was that like for you?
It was really low time in my life for sure, man. It was scary. It was hurt. I was just devastated. I would say there's nothing worse than losing the person you love simply because you don't have the tools necessary to keep them. And you're right. My wife and I loved each other. It wasn't for lack of love. It was just lack of relationships tools and some of this other stuff. And then again, all our subconscious wounds that were playing out that we didn't quite see, soon enough. that ultimately would lead to our destruction of our relationship, if you will. Yeah, so it was really rough. I mean, I had no idea. I had to have a lot of faith in God and just trust that everything was happening for a reason, and that I didn't understand it at the time, but that for some reason it would play out, and I would learn it. I would learn from it, grow from it, and change from it. And that's really what I just decided to do. I let it change me. I let it, affect me in a positive way so that I can, be a better person from this, not let it destroy me. I always say now they call it a breakup, not a breakdown. And so if we're going to break up, I'm going to move up the ladder. I'm going to learn some new skills. I'm going to figure this out so that I can move up in my life. So that's what I like to say. We're breaking up. We're not breaking down. I can choose to break down, but I'm going to choose to break up and use this experience for something good so that I can kind of learn from it, grow from it, and be a better person in the long run. And as fate would have it, like I said, in my case, my wife and I were able to come back around and put our relationship back together with some new tools. That's not always the case for everybody. Sometimes we do have to move on and we do have a new relationship, but hopefully at that point, if we've learned some things and we've grown from that experience, that new relationship could be the one that is ultimately the greatest thing. And now we're able to kind of have a great relationship with that new person, if that's the way it kind of works out in the end.
I want to share with you, let me dig it out of my WhatsApp. I got this WhatsApp message from my buddy yesterday. Where is it? It was a C.S. Lewis quote. So the quote he sent to me was, "Children are not a distraction for more important work. They are the most important work. In the end, the legacy that matters won't be what you built in the world. It will be who you raised and whether they felt safe, seen, and loved in your presence." And he said to me, "This is what you and Liza, my wife, do beautifully in raising that gorgeous little girl, my daughter Zia, who's 9. But when I read that from him, I didn't think of my daughter. I thought of my 24-year-old son. And I thought I was not there for him. He does not feel seen. He did not feel heard. He did not feel like he mattered. And I felt an incredible amount of shame when I got that note. He was sending it to me because he knows that I'm a different dad now than I was then. But I felt incredible shame. Did you feel any shame when you was going through that mess? And how was it manifesting if you did?
I mean, in some ways, yeah. I mean, some shame, I guess, but for the most part, I was just so dysfunctional because of my own childhood and a lot of the things I've been battling my whole life trying to figure this out. And overall, I think because I'm a little older dad, I did have a different perspective. My son was definitely hurt. My son is my life. My son is number one. In fact, he's the only reason I stayed in Massachusetts. When things broke up between my wife and I, my first inclination was to run back to Florida, which is where I'm from. I got a lot of friends and family there. That was my first inclination. The only thing that kept me from doing that was I had a buddy who challenged me. He said, "Hey, listen, your father abandoned you. My father abandoned me. Look at how much we're struggling because of that." He says, "You can't run away. Your son's going to deal with all that stuff." And I said, "You're right. I'm stuck here. I've got to fight. If I've got to live on the street corner, if I just got to be homeless and live on the street corner, that's what it's going to be." I didn't care. That was my mindset. I was willing to say, I can't abandon my son because he is everything. And that is the main thing. I didn't want to pass this trauma on to my son for sure. In fact, my wife and I today, that's our number one motivation is our kids, and to say we don't want to pass our trauma on to them. And we do a pretty good job. I mean, my brother was up here this summer. We had a nice little vacation. And one of the greatest compliments he ever paid me, he says, you and your wife do a great job raising those kids. He says, you really do a great job. You listen to them, they feel heard, all that. And I just honestly, man, it brings me almost to tears just thinking about it now. Like that's like the greatest compliment in the world. That's everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful, man.
That's worth everything.
Do you know why that's even stronger that you said that? Is in the beginning, you were talking about the breakup, and part of the breakup you said was difference in parenting styles. So you went from a marriage breaking up because you had difference in parenting styles to someone telling you you're both co-parenting in amazing ways, which shows the growth that you've done. So I just want to honor you in that.
Yeah. And to add to that real quick, one of the problems I had was my wife, and this was her own issue, was like she had a hard time connecting to the kids. And that was again, really from her own childhood trauma because she didn't have a connection with her parents. Right. And so as a mom herself, she really struggled to make that connection with the kids. And now she, through the experience, she learned that. And she is a different mom today. She's beautiful. She listens to the kids more. She's able to connect with them more. And their voices heard, and she's an incredible. She was a good mom before, but she's an amazing mom today. we have a much better, we're much on board together with our parenting style. And that has definitely made a huge difference, being able to, co-parent, parent together in a way that we're both on, for the most part, the same page. We have some differences. We can challenge each other. I'm sometimes maybe a little too easygoing, and she's maybe a little bit more disciplinarian than I, and we can argue about that here and there, but that's the little stuff so much. For the most part, the big stuff and the big picture is the most important thing. And we're on the same page with that today. And that's beautiful.
I almost like my life is like two lives. It's almost like I've lived two lives. Like my
Right.
first life was with my first wife and my son. My second life is kind of like with my second wife and my daughter and my son. And I would say in my first life, we were so young when we had Jude. We just didn't know what the fuck we were doing, basically.
Yeah.
So we never thought about anything. We just were both clueless, right? And then I had Zia in my 40s. Me and my wife were in our 40s. And we really struggled with parenting styles. Like it's simple little things like she comes from America, she's like Korean American, I come from the UK. Little tiny little differences about what we raised, what's important, what's not. And all of a sudden we had a daughter, and our relationship, which was like sweet and super cool, got really, really difficult. And we were fighting a lot on our beliefs about raising children, right? It is really tough, isn't it? When you're both raising them from your inner child, not actually from your conscious self.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think you nailed it. And that's exactly right. I mean, kids will bring that out of us. And that's the thing, because yeah, you're going along, the relationship's good. Now you got a kid. And now as we begin to parent, the parenting is really what triggered a lot of that emotion in ourselves, and a lot of what we were fighting for because of our own childhood, our own perspective, our own thoughts. That's what was now really coming to the forefront as we tried to raise our children together. And yeah, it's amazing. Children are the greatest thing in the world. I promise you, it's the best thing ever. Kids are amazing, but that is one of the things it will do, is challenge you to be a better man, a better woman, and to really look at ourselves and say, okay, wait a second, like, how do we do this? And it will trigger those little arguments and differences when we're parenting it. Those things come out, and that's really what played out for my wife and I as well. Our children really became, my son especially became the main trigger for a lot of our disagreements and fights, if you will. And we love our son. We love, it's not like we don't love him. We both love him tremendously. It's just that we had those different ideas. So it was a gift. Again, kids can do that. They can bring it out of you. And thankfully, it, kind of brought it out of us. And now we're able to heal through that. And now, our son is able to see us both having a great relationship together, and we're better parents together. And, so that's on the flip side, but it's, you want to try to heal that as much as possible, so you don't have those two lives like you had, right? I mean, it hurts sometimes to realize that, maybe you had that first one and you didn't do everything, the way you'd hoped you had, looking back, right, for that first son, if you will. That's got to hurt a little bit. And, hopefully he grows through that, he learns through that. It is what it is, but at least now you've learned it, and you can pass it on for your your new child. I think it's a daughter, he said. So, and that's life. Sometimes we just learn, and sometimes that's the way life works. So we have to forgive ourselves and show ourselves a little bit of grace, but also say, wow, okay, I've learned it differently. Now I can start doing it differently. And that's all we can do sometimes.
Yeah, the key thing for me was just really understanding my wife's worldview. It's like so for example, I would say that she's more overprotective than I am. So I sometimes look at that from like a foundation of fear, and I'm like, I don't want to live from a foundation of fear. So sometimes I get triggered by that. But what I'm doing a lot better than I did at the beginning of our relationship is understanding that for her it's really important and it means something to her, and that she's coming from a place of trying to protect and keep our daughter safe. So like coming from that angle versus very reactively coming from my past of, oh my God, so this means you are this if you care too much, or if you keep asking someone to wash their hands or take their shoes off in the house. All of that when I was younger meant something status wise. Like if you took your shoes off in someone's house, they were posh and they were higher class and they had money. So you don't realize that you have all this stuff that you drag into your relationship, and it doesn't come out until the kids are 1, and then they activate your 1-year-old. They're 9, they activate your 9-year-old. They're 24. My son now, 24. I look at my son now, and I remember I was married and just about to have him. And I look at him and I see the version of myself that I'm ashamed of but I also see him transforming into the man that I am today. Now, I'm not projecting that he is me, but that's what I'm being triggered by in him, right? Like I see his, you said earlier on the mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, when someone behaves in a certain way and it triggers you, it's either because you hate that part of yourself inside you, or you wish you could behave in the same way. And so I do see myself in my boy, the good and the bad. And so he's a perfect mirror for me. Perfect mirror for
Yeah,
me.
for sure. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about integrated attachment theory. What is it, and why was it so important in rebuilding your life?
Yeah, so attachment theory has been around really since the 70s, and it really it's based upon how we attach in relationships, and there's four different major attachment styles. Number one, you have a secure attachment style. Those people are emotionally balanced. They really know how to communicate well. Sit there, they know what their needs are. They know how to talk about their needs. They know how to just kind of they do relationships well, and they're emotionally balanced. So if God forbid the relationship ends, they may be hurt by it a little bit, but they're not going to be devastated. It's not like life is over. They just kind of accept it as that happens sometimes, and we're not maybe compatible. They're just they're the kind we all want to be in a relationship. Just very balanced, very good connect, commit, very good with communication and everything else. Unfortunately, I think most of us fall into the other three categories. Number one, you have an anxious, preoccupied. Anxious, preoccupied tend to really value relationships, a lot. It's number one in their lives, and they like a lot of communication, and they're always kind of connecting to their spouse, and it's really to the point where it's unhealthy. A lot of times, codependency can be a big issue in there. And this just comes from a lot of their own wounds. Like for me, fear of abandonment, fear of being alone, fear of being unloved, or some of those things. It's just that childhood wound that's kind of driving the train to an unhealthy zone, if you will. That's an anxious, preoccupied. On another side of that is what's called the dismissive-avoidant. Dismissive avoidance, they typically have a hard time understanding their own emotions, connecting with their emotions at all. If they do feel them at all, the emotions are bad, and they'll isolate. They're very independent, hyper independent, to the point they really just like a lot of time alone and away from other people, and they process slower. They don't communicate well. They communicate more with their actions and not their words as much. So sometimes you don't understand what they're saying, because they're not necessarily saying it verbally. They're saying it more with their actions. And they think that you're supposed to understand that, right? And so that's sometimes their own perspective and point of view, which can be difficult. In between, there's what's called a fearful avoidant. Fearful avoidance will swing between the two. A lot of times they're very connected. The relationship is very good. They're feeling close and lovey-dovey. And maybe next week they're breaking up with you for what appears to be no reason. They're just, or there's causing chaos and a little, craziness in there. And they just came from that same thing, that very wounded children, different perspective on things. Probably came from, like myself, a little bit of chaos, a little dysfunctional family where things are a little bit all over. They're used to the chaos a little bit. So that's why sometimes it's hard to find a little bit of balance for them where they're just nice and steady and kind of flowing, if you will. But those are the three unhealthy attachment styles, and nobody wants to be in any one of those three. I came across Thais Gibson's work. She's out of Canada. She created a program which actually begins to heal and move us towards towards more of the healthy version, right? So that's the whole thing, is the integrated attachment theory program moves us towards that, so that we're able to get those tools and now become more healthy in our relationships. And it really consists of 6 core elements. Those core elements are: number one, fixing your core wounds, really understanding what they are, beginning to do some work on those to begin to heal those. Number two, you're going to work on your needs. What do I truly need in life? What are, what is that underlying, if you will? What are my daily needs, stuff like that? What are they? How do I convey them to my spouse? How do I actually meet most of my own needs, right? How do I start to know my needs, but then also learn how to fulfill my own needs, so I'm not. Number three, it's going to be my emotions. How do I deal with emotions? Emotions aren't a bad thing. Emotions are just information. So whether we're angry, whether we're sad, whether we're happy, whether we're any of those, fearful, whatever it might be, why? That's the thing we have to go back and ask ourselves. Why? What am I telling myself that's causing me to feel this emotion? And so that's where we really have to use our emotions properly for different purpose. After that, we're going to talk about our needs. We're going to talk about communication is important, right? So communication, how do we communicate? And I talked a little bit about the difference, or sometimes like a dismissive avoidant, they communicate with their actions more, right? So how do we learn how to communicate in a way that we're actually learning to listen to each other and not listening to defend? Because you mentioned that earlier as well. When my wife and I were going through our arguments earlier on, I was always listening to defend because my wounds, my own fear of abandonment, my own fear of not being good enough, those were things that were subconsciously causing me to say, oh, well, I have to prove that she's wrong. There's, that I'm perfect, that I'm not anything like that. Right. So I was listening to defend, whereas now I listen to understand. And that's a big difference when we do that. And then again, we have some tools now that, we practice more when we do have serious things to talk about. We have different ways of doing that in a way that actually moves the needle properly. So another one we're going to talk about is our behaviors. How do we actually change our behavior so that, I'm acting in a manner that is worthy of respect, right? And, instead of flying off the handle when I'm a little upset or angry, right? Maybe I learn how to go for a walk and I get myself into a balanced state before I continue to, kind of act in a way that's unhealthy, right? So I have to learn how to change that. And then of course our boundaries. Our boundaries, I always say, is kind of like the fence around the house, if you will. That's really what keeps us safe, keeps it all together, by learning how to set healthy, good boundaries, and then learning how to, again, how do I communicate those boundaries? How do I enforce those boundaries in ways that allow me to have, really a good, respectful relationships with everybody around me? So that, and sometimes if somebody can't respect my boundaries, ultimately, sometimes that turns into a relationship that isn't going to be healthy and isn't going to work long term. And so, but those are the 6 core elements that we work on that really change the dynamics of, number one, the relationship to ourselves, and number 2, the relationship to really anybody else. That includes our spouse, that includes our moms, dads, brothers, sisters, friends, coworkers. Every kind of relationship can change once we learn how to kind of look at those things differently and begin to heal them, begin to operate in a different manner. It can really spill over to every area of our life.
If your relationship feels like it's hanging by a thread, arguments on loop, no one feeling seen or safe, then I can help. I coach people one-to-one, guiding couples and individuals to stop the blame game and start rebuilding with radical responsibility. We use proven tools like IFS, attachment theory, nervous system regulation, boundaries that stick, and clear, compassionate communication so you can calm the chaos, repair the trust, and create a plan you can both follow. This isn't talk for talk's sake. We're talking practical reps, weekly actions, real accountability tailored to your situation. So if you're ready to salvage the love and rebuild it stronger, email the strive-method@gmail.com with the subject line relationship help, or message me on Instagram @LeeDavyCoaching. Let's piece it back together properly. Okay, right back to Bryan Power. So thanks for that. We'll touch upon the 6 aspects of Ty's work. Ty's, is it Ty?
Gibson, yeah, it's Thais Gibson. THAIS. Thais Gibson. Yeah.
But going back to the attachment styles of it, so we got secure, anxious, fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant.
Yeah.
There's a test, by the way, folks, that you can do. You can go to the Integrative Attachment Theory website, and there's a test there. When you first got into this work, what did you identify as? Was it anxious?
Yeah, at first I was leaning more anxious because of the situation I was in. So I definitely saw a lot of the anxious side. As I began to do more of the work, I realized I am probably more fearful avoidant, I am really more in that middle. And that makes a lot more sense for me because I definitely grew up in that chaos, chaotic kind of childhood, if you will. And I had a lot of different wounds that were on both sides of the coin for sure. But I kind of believe, in fact, for the most part, I believe a lot of us are fearful avoidant, but we do kind of lean either anxious or dismissive, depending upon sometimes the relationships that we're in. But not saying everybody is there, but I do think that's a pretty big category for a lot of us, is that we're falling into that fearful avoidant, but we do kind of lean here or there based upon that particular relationship that we're in.
What was some of the behaviors and outputs of your relationship with your parents or your teachers, any caregivers when you were younger, that you think that led to this fearful, avoidant, anxious attachment style? Maybe you could give us 1 or 2. You don't have to go like super deep, but it might help the audience.
Like I said, my mom was a single mom with 2 kids, so she wasn't even home a lot of the times. So there was a lot of abandonment there. The main one I would say is that my father was in and out of my childhood, and my father would come into my life for a little while. There'd be a lot of chaos. Eventually, he'd disappear for 6 months or a year, and then he'd come back around. And I was a daddy's boy. As much as my parents were messed up and had their issues or whatever, my dad would come around. I was still just a little boy who loved his dad. I didn't understand all the dynamics of why there were problems in it, everything. And so I would attach to my father when he was there, and then he'd be gone, and I'd feel that pain and loss of him not being there. Right. So abandonment one was a big one for me. And that was really one that was being triggered when my wife and I, started to have our issues, that the fear of abandonment was coming through big time for me. And yeah, I would say that's a big one for me. And then just my mom just being difficult, having a hard time trying to raise two boys, not really knowing how to raise boys, if you will. She had a hard time, in her own childhood and her own issues. She brought a lot of that pain with her along the way. She was great at putting food on the table and working hard and getting through that and surviving a very difficult time. But on the flip side, she didn't know how to nurture sometimes. She didn't really know how to, challenge us as boys. And she wasn't really the most, nurse. She was very much trying to get our basic needs right? Like food over their, food on the table, roof over their heads. That was the most important thing. And a lot of times, because she just didn't have the energy, there wasn't really a whole lot of extra energy for the TLC, for the tender love and care, if you will. And it's just unfortunate that that's sometimes where single moms have to deal with, or single parents. It could be mom or dad, right? That's the tough part where, your time is taken up. It can be very stressful. I find it with my wife and I. Listen, it's hard sometimes with two of us parenting and having a pretty good situation and having a lot of stability. Sometimes things get stressful even with that. So I totally understand that. And it can be very challenging, but those are all the things I think that really, formed, again, my childhood wounds, and moving around a lot too. Again, I moved almost every year for the first 10 years of my life. So again, I'd make friends and then all that of a sudden they were gone. And then I'd make some friends and they were gone. And so, it was just all that stuff really adds up and gives us our perception about life and begins to wound us in ways that, again, we learn how to deal with them and we survive through them. But as adults, we're now acting in ways that are not really healthy. And we take that unhealthiness into our relationships, and that's where it's starting to destroy them, because my fear of abandonment, let's say, is keeping me doing things, people pleasing, maybe going over to the top, doing things that I don't, not even being true to myself. It's the wound that's driving that, if you will. And so I may be acting in ways that my wife can be looking on and saying, that's not super attractive. That's not something I find very, really great, even though I'm coming from a good place, my heart, everything else, right? That doesn't matter. It's not genuine, to be honest with you. It's not fully genuine. And it's really not a way that sometimes is attractive to others. So it all plays out.
As part of your journey doing the work, did you ever find yourself going back to your mom and dad and having some of these conversations about what you was learning?
My father passed away. His body gave out when I was in my early 20s, after many years of addiction and stuff that he battled, unfortunately. So my mom is still alive and well. And my mom and I have a decent relationship, but my mom can also be challenging in her own ways. And so there's a fine line between how much we can kind of deal with and kind of handle. We can't change other people sometimes. We can only change the way we work in that dynamics of that relationship, if you will. And so I know there's certain things my mom is great at, and I love to be able to connect with her in certain ways, and in other ways that I know I may never get certain things out of that relationship. And so I just accept my mom for who she is, the way she is, try to love her, in that regard, right? And appreciate what I have in my mom for that person. But I also understand that there's things that she's just unable to kind of be and do and everything else. So that's the way that works. And so, we have a pretty good relationship today. Our relationship has been rocky throughout my, adult life too, sometimes because of different things. But, today we're able to communicate on a fairly decent level, and we have a pretty good relationship. I mean, I always wish it could be better, but, it is what it is. I'm thankful to have my mom still in my life today, and we're able to share at least a pretty decent relationship,
Yeah, I hear you. Sorry to hear about your father.
Yeah.
I have a memory of actually taking my boy and his cousin to watch The Lord of the Rings. I think it was Return of the King years ago. And I went in the movie theater and I came out and I was like, I've spent £100. And I remember ringing my mum and saying, Ma'am, I'm really sorry that I've always given you shit for us never going to the movie. You never took us to the movies. I just spent £100 on two kids. You had four and you had no money. I just want to say sorry. And she broke down. And I realized how much pressure I put on her by complaining and moaning and groaning that my childhood wasn't right. And it wasn't until I had kids that I realized I felt the powerlessness and the chaos and the being pulled in so many different directions. My wife wants my time. My boss wants my time. My kids want my time. My mates want my time. Yeah. And then I realized, oh shit, like.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's easy when your kids look up and think your parents got all these issues, or why can't I have this or that and everything else, and that's one of the things we learn as we grow up, and especially when you have kids too. Now we're able to see, like, wow, wait a second, it makes a lot more sense as to why my parents behaved a certain way and understanding them a little bit differently. And so, yeah, it's a tough lesson and a tough pill to swallow sometimes,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's kind of the way it works for sure, you know.
I
Yep.
I definitely felt that in that moment, she felt seen and heard, which is
Yeah.
like part of what we're trying to do in all of our relationships. Like it was a magical moment, I think. What about, so you were fearful avoidant, anxious-ish.
Yeah.
What about your wife? What was she, and where was the challenge then, if
Yeah.
in your type versus type?
Yeah, so again, she was leaning more that dismissive avoidant at the time. You know, she was very much yeah, a lot of things that she did. So one of the things dismissive avoidance will tend to do is they'll flaw find. You know, she would flaw find in me little things that were, you know, again, I'm not perfect, so yeah, you can look for my flaws or you can look for the good parts. But she would definitely point out more of some of the flaws sometimes. Stonewalling, she really had a hard time with when we did have some fights. She would stonewall me. By stonewalling, I mean not talking for days at a time sometimes. And sometimes that's my own part because I'm so anxious. I'm wanting to get in there and talk so much. And the more I want to talk, the more that would push her away and not want to talk because, again, that's her own perception, her own fears, her own subconscious behavior. So that's where you can see some of the combative behavior. Whereas, you know, somebody's leaning on that side, they had these types of wounds. Somebody else over here has this type of wound. Now we're kind of wounding each other, even though we want to work through this. We want to figure that out, right? So yeah, she was definitely leaning a lot more dismissive. And you know, that's makes a lot of sense from her own childhood and the way she was kind of raised. Yeah, she was definitely put aside and told, you know, to kind of deal with her emotions independently. And she just learned how to be hyper independent. You know, she is very hyper independent. You know, it's sometimes I love about her, right? It's one of those things I love about her, but the other times it's like, you know, you don't have to be so hyper independent. You know, so it's finding that balance is where we begin to get a little bit more healthy and, on both sides. You know, we have to kind of meet in the middle. So where, you know, sometimes we have to learn how to, you know, not be so anxious, not, you know, have a little bit more balance in our lives on the anxious side, if you will. Sometimes dismissive avoidance have to learn how to soften up and to it is safe to connect with our partner. It is safe to, you know, need other people in our lives and want to, you know, really kind of have that type of thing. So we just have to kind of meet in the middle sometimes. But yeah, yeah, a lot of times, and that's the way it works. A lot of times we'll find that other side. We do end up in relationships a lot of times with that part of us that we're lacking. And that's what we find in a lot of times. We're attracted to that side that we don't necessarily bring to the table ourselves. And those are the things that we love about each other in the beginning. But as the, you know, relationship progresses, a lot of times those are the things later on that we begin to hate about that other person. And so that's where we have to start looking and say, wait a second, you know, why am I so hateful, or, you know, why don't I, you know, like this part about this person anymore when it's something that I found extremely attractive in the beginning. And again, a lot of times that is just our own wound showing its ugly head. But again, unless we're aware of that, we just don't understand it. We just start to think it's that person isn't perfect and all this other stuff, you know. But yeah.
When you were in the work and you were learning about anxious attachment styles and you're learning about avoidant attachment styles, what were some of the light bulbs that came on for you that you suddenly saw in your relationship, that you could now behave differently towards your wife, or skills that came in? Like what were some of the light bulbs that you realized and saw because of the literature, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of them right there. Is just number one, the way we communicate a lot of times. You know, that was a huge one because the way we would always communicate before, she would try to, you know, talk to me about something. I would always listen to defend myself. I was never really listening to understand her. And so we now do something where we hold space for each other, where she can talk for 5 or 10 minutes. I do not interrupt her, which I'm a classic interrupter because I want to always stop that stuff. Right. So now we can, you know, she talks for 5 or 10 minutes. I listen and to understand and really learn from her. I want to hear this woman's voice. I want to hear her heart. I want to hear what she's trying to share with me, you know, and I don't feel so attacked. I don't have to internalize it as an attack, if you will. And then I get to go and I can talk for 5 or 10 minutes completely uninterrupted. She's now listening to me, so that she's, you know, trying to understand me as well and trying to really connect. And when we do that, it's like, wow, you feel so much more heard. You feel so much more understood. And it is such a healthier way to get through some of these really tough things, right? If we're having serious conversations about some things that are important, say about our children or something, you know, now we can have that conversation in a healthy way that actually moves the needle in a way that's actually pretty good. So that's a new tool that we do. Learning how to rephrase things and using I statements is really big. Where, you know, I don't point the finger at her so much. I can say, hey, you know what? You know, when you don't pick up the clothes off the bedroom floor, I feel. You know, I feel this way. You know, I feel this way. It's not like, oh, you know, you're a jerk for not picking up the clothes off the floor, or getting angry about it or frustrated in that regard. I can have a good conversation and kind of just rephrase it differently. But that's a different way to do some things. Also, just emotional regulation. This is the first one. I've learned how to not to have conversations when we're emotionally triggered. And that's a big one for me, because if I was emotionally triggered, I would want to have that conversation, even though I want to get through this. I want to talk about it now. It's like, learning how to just, get back, calm down, get myself to a regulated state before we have that conversation, because nothing good comes from a conversation when either party is dysregulated. So that's a big step there. Just changing, learning how to get my own needs met a little bit differently, becoming more independent. Again, I kind of lost myself since I moved to Massachusetts. I hadn't really connected with other friends and had other hobbies and stuff and things that I like to do. And so I'm getting back to being myself a little bit more, where, going to the gym and doing some hiking and, finding the things I love to do and finding a little bit more balance in my life, so it's not all on her to fulfill my, make me happy type of thing. So there's so many things that I could say that, really were different before that are changing and have changed tremendously. Those are just a few of the samples for sure. But the communication, I think, has been probably one of the biggest ones. Learning how, again, not to communicate when we're triggered, learning how to communicate in a way that's actually really allowing us to be heard and seen. And that's been a huge game changer.
Yeah, listening to everything you're saying there, just a summary comes up into my mind for the audience that might be thinking, "Oh, wow, there's so much stuff here." What's coming up for me as I'm listening to Bryan talk is a switch from my communication with this person is built on the foundation of I need to be right. So I'm gonna converse with this person, and everything she says, I'm gonna spin it around so I'm right and she's wrong, and that's like the foundation. And you switch that from, instead of I want to be right and she needs to be wrong, you switch it into curiosity. She's like, I'm gonna have a conversation and get curious about this woman in my life. Like, I want to know her core wounds, her needs, her emotions, her behaviors, her communication styles, what her boundaries are or not. Like, I really am curious here. What is her attachment style? And because then when you know her better, you can now adjust how you behave towards her based on that information. Whereas probably before the restraining order, you were blind, right? You had no tools, you had no fucking clue, basically. And you can't see her.
Yeah.
It's like that wrestler John Cena in American Wrestling goes, "You can't see me." It's like you can't see her, she can't see you, and you're just both in this protective state, right?
Yeah, you nailed it, man. That you are so spot on. That is exactly what was going on for sure. And yeah, you nailed it. I don't know. I think that's the best. I think that somebody has put that perfectly. And honestly, that's exactly what was going on. Not being heard, not being seen, not being understood. All the other fears, her fears, my fears, all this stuff was just a commingled mess. And now, as we are able to kind of sort through that, we have a little bit more clarity on each other. We see each other differently. We see each other clearly. We, in a much clearer way. And we're going to continue to learn about each other. But, we see each other clearly. We want to, learn from each other, grow from it, trust each other. And just, when we do all that, like, man, it just feels so much better, so much different. It's an amazing journey today that we have. I mean, I thought our relationship was pretty good before, because we had a lot of laughs. We had some really good things there, whatever, but we had a lot more struggle in ways that didn't need to be. And now today we have all those laughs and all the goodness with a whole lot less of those fights and struggles and everything else. And we both feel more comfortable inside the relationship, with each other. We know that we love each other tremendously. We're working as a team now, and what a difference, man. It is night and day, difference. And I hope everybody can get to this side of a relationship and not stay stuck in that mid zone where you're struggling and battling each other and kind of, you're together because you do love each other, but you're struggling through it. And that's difficult. And it's unfortunate. I want you to get to the side where you're actually able to hear each other, connect, see each other, and now be blessed on a daily basis where you're waking up every day thinking, wow, I am the luckiest guy in the world. What an amazing journey. What an amazing person I'm able to share my life with. And, this is where it's at. This is where, you want to get to. I promise you, it's great.
Yeah, it feels like you have a lot more awareness, right? Like, for me, self-awareness is key. So like in my relationship now, we've gone through like some difficult months, because we both went into a work project. So we both was working we live in the UK. We both went to Korea working, We took our daughter with us. My son was also there working. So we're all working. So we're all in work mode. Just prior to that, I was away in Europe working away from the family. After Korea, I came to America on my own. So I've been in America working, and I'm going back on Friday. And I'm very aware that when I go back, right, that it's not my house. Do you know what I mean? Like they've built a house and a structure and a set of processes that don't include a dad and a husband, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's tough, but yeah.
I always remember that reading this by the astronaut Guide to Earth, I think he was called. It was a Canadian astronaut, and he was talking about how he would go and spend months on end at the International Space Station, and he would go back to his house and think, I'm king of the hill again. Like nothing's changed. Like I've been away for 6 months. I'm going to come in and nothing's changed. And he said it took him a long time to realize that it wasn't his home anymore. And he had to be aware of everybody else because we have co-regulated nervous systems. And so he had to like be aware of that. So I'm aware of that. Like I'm aware that when I go back home on Friday, I've got to be really hyper aware that there might be more triggers than normal because all of a sudden dad's there, right? Dad's got more stuff. Dad's got more mess. Dad's now got to have dinner. And so that awareness piece, I'm just using this, me going back Friday as an example, is absolutely huge, right? If you're aware, for example, like your wife has periods. We don't have periods, right? Like, that impacts her in a way that changes her biology and her physiological state. Understanding that is really important for our relationships, right? Like massive. Okay, back to this friend of mine at church. It was suggesting, oh, what if she goes and gets fixed? Another question he asked me, and I thought it was a great question, is I'm going to throw it to you. Is what happens if you decide, okay, I'm going to go do the work. I'm going to go and do a course in integrated attachment theory, and the other person doesn't. Mm-hmm. Like, what happened with you? Like, did you both end up doing it? It doesn't sound like you did, right? You did your own journey to start with. How did that go?
Yeah. So I always, somebody put it to me this way, that two are better than none, two are better than one, but one is better than none. Okay. So yes, optimally it'd be great if both parties get some work done and begin to do that together. But if that's not the case, then one is still better than nobody doing this work, right? And so if nothing else, you need to take the reins and say, I'm going to do the work, right? And so let me be the person, let me take the lead on learning how to do this. Now, I truly believe when somebody starts to learn these things and really begins to apply them, that alone can change the dynamics of a relationship tremendously. One person can truly make a big difference in that relationship. And a lot of times that other person will eventually catch on and realize, wait a second, there's some things being done differently here. There are some things going on here. And a lot of times that interest will get sparked. And sometimes they'll want to come along with us as well. But sometimes we have to take the lead and say, okay, wait a second. That's not about what they're going to do. Again, we can't control the other person. The only person we can control is us. How do we act? How do we handle ourselves? And so let's take the lead on that and be that person that takes the lead, right? And then I promise you a lot of times that other person will come around. And if they don't, sometimes we do outgrow people, right? So if I'm working on myself, I'm healing, I'm growing, and that other person just is not interested in growing, changing, and they become an extremely negative type person in our life, sometimes that's where that relationship does kind of get to some rocky road, maybe even ends. Sometimes that's what that person needs, though. That may be the wake-up call for them to say, wow, wait a second, I lost this beautiful person in my life because they started to heal, they started to change, and I stayed stuck and stubborn. Sometimes that's the wake-up call that they need to maybe make a difference. And sometimes not. Sometimes some people will choose to stay stuck their entire lives. We can't change them. That's the reality. We can only focus on ourselves. I am responsible for me. And how I show up can make a difference in that dynamics of relationship ultimately. But even if it's not that exact relationship, it will make a difference in the relationship to myself and the relationships I have all around me. And yes, it overflows all those areas. But to say that, well, I'm not going to do the work at all, or I'm going to wait for that person to do the work. I always say this, if my wife had done the work and I didn't, then she might have moved on and had a really great relationship with somebody else, and I'd stay stuck in that negative zone. Or if I did the work and she didn't do some work, then I would probably move on and maybe not come back together. Or if neither one of us did the work, then yeah, we might have stayed together. We might have come back around. We might have had another, but we'd still be in that same mess. We'd still be in that mediocre relationship, if you will. So that's the thing, is somebody has to do the work. It's best when both do the work, but if that's not the case, then that's okay. Take the lead, do the work yourself, and see where that really leads, because that can really be a big difference. And I think when our spouse, especially as men, I think men should be the leader in the relationship. And I think our wives will typically come along and say, they're proud of us. How many wives are going to look on their husband and say, wow, you're doing a lot of work, you're changing, you're listening to me better, you're kind of paying attention. And how many wives are going to be upset about that? They're probably going to be like, oh my God, this is becoming the man I always dreamed about and knew that he could become. And they'd be proud of us, So yeah, I would tell your friend, let's get some work done and see where that can change, and not wait for the wife. Stop putting the focus on her,
Yeah, that was greatly put, That's
Yeah.
basically what I told him. I mean, he could summarize it by saying, if you're thinking that the other person needs to do something, start there, right? That's the first self-awareness piece of, I want her to change. I think it was Don Miguel Ruiz that said, if you want a dog, don't get a cat. So like, if you're thinking, I want a dog, but I got a cat, you're in trouble, because you want her to change. You're giving you control away, right? So I mean, that's the thing. And the other thing as well, like you touched upon it, like, work on yourself and then see what happens, right? If the other person is not stepping up to your new set of boundaries, your new
Mhm.
standards, your new values or whatever, rest assured. Like, again, this is one of my principles, right? Like, rest assured, there will be somebody else out there for you and somebody else out there for them. I'm under no illusion that if me and Liza split up tomorrow, she would find somebody who would complete her probably more than I do. Like, because there's 7.8 billion people in the world.
Well,
Like, I'd be a fool to say like I'm the only one that can, like,
yeah.
tick every box,
Well, one of the things I really learned here, Lee, is that we always think maybe it's the next person. Oh, it's the next relationship. It's not, and we typically find the same thing. We just move it to a different person. So unless we heal ourselves, unless we figure this out and change, we're gonna find the next situation is it's always the same. We're finding ourselves in the same thing because we haven't fixed it. So you can sit there and say, oh, it's the next person. It's next. No, it's not. Almost every single time, you're going to find yourself in that same position, same arguments, same fights, same problems, and you're going to and it might be a little different variations to it, but essentially you're going to have the same problems, same issues. So it's not the next person, and that's the gift of staying married and fighting for your marriage and fighting for a relationship, because that's the challenge, is to say, wait a second, if I really am here to spend my life with this person, how do I fix this? How do I change through this? How do we make it better? Not with the next person, but with this person. How do I do it now with this situation, and do our part to at least step up and try to make that right, before we go, calling it quits and saying it's the other person. And obviously, yeah, I'm just going to move on to the next one and that's going to be perfect. No, it's not. It's going to be the same thing you found in this one. So that's generally what happens.
There's a great story from Alain de Botton in The Art of Travel, and I'm going to say it because behind you you've got the palm tree, right? Okay, so he's in London, and everything's grey, everything's drab. He's really depressed, and he sees a bus come past, and the bus says, "Come to the Bahamas," right? And there's a palm tree on there, so he thinks, "Fuck it." So he books a flight to the Bahamas, and he finds himself on a beach with the palm tree like you have behind you, but he
Yeah.
still feels depressed. And in that moment, he realized that he took his head with him.
That's right. That's right. That's
And
exactly
that's
right.
what you're saying, right? That's what you're saying.
I love
Um,
that. Exactly.
Brian, what are you currently working on? How can people work with you, learn from what you're doing?
Yeah.
Let us know.
Yeah, I'm currently just working on sharing this story, sharing this information, and trying to, help people, get through their relationships and learn how. I'm trying to save some relationships out there. To be honest with you, man, I hate, seeing people going through breakups and challenges like this. I know how hard it is. I know how heartbreaking it can be. I've been through, some breakups in my life, and it's really tough. And like I said, I think there's nothing worse in the world than losing the person you love simply because you don't have the tools necessary to keep them. And so I'm trying to spread the word on how do we get some tools so that you can, have better relationships. And I do that through my website at myrelationshipfail.com or makeyourrelationshipfail.com. Either one will take you to my website. On there, you can take the attachment quiz, which will give you an idea of what your attachment style is. It's free to do that. Have some fun with that. If you decide you want to delve into this work a little bit, join the personal development school through my website. Okay, that is Tice Gibson School. And you join through my website, you're going to get the best price available to you that she offers on those programs, but also give you a free session with me, a chance for us to talk. I want to hear your story. I want to hear what you're going through. I want to see if I can give you some pointers, some tips on where to kind of go and maybe some things to begin to work on immediately so that you can start moving the needle as fast as possible. If you decide you want to work with me beyond that, we can certainly talk about, continuing how we can work together so we can really move the needle in your life and your relationship so that you can really come out on this other side and begin to experience what a truly wonderful relationship can be like. And so that's what the best way to go is go to my website, myrelationshipfail.com or makeyourrelationshipfail.com.
Okay, I will make sure I put all those details down in the show notes. Bryan, thanks for being a guest today. You've been absolutely amazing. Just want to say from one man to another, on behalf of your little boy, who may not even know this, or someday he will, and he'll thank you for it. Thank you for staying there for him. As one father to another, I didn't do that. I got a job that took me around the world, and I wasn't there when he needed me the most. And if I have any regrets in life, it was I didn't have anybody around me at the time to say to me, hey, your dad abandoned you. You're about to do the same thing. I didn't have that. And I thought I was doing the right thing by earning money for him and his mum versus really he just needed his dad there. And I didn't do that. So well done for doing that. Well done for doing that.
God put it on my heart to make sure that we didn't make that mistake, and I'm just thankful. That's one of the best decisions of my life was to fight for that for sure, and that's really the beginning of what really kind of made all this come back around and put me in this position today. Was that one decision to stick around? So
awesome! Thank you very much, Bryan. You take care of yourself.
Thanks so much, man. I had a pleasure. Thanks so much, man.
So that was Bryan Power. What a story! What I got out of that was inspiration, hope, and shame. Let's talk about the inspiration first. He thought his relationship was over, right? He thought it was over. He's got a restraining order. He can't even speak to her. And maybe that was the best thing that ever happened to him. Because likely, as he said, he didn't have the skills to navigate himself around that situation. He would have been at his lowest ebb at that moment, and he probably would have made it worse. Actually, the restraining order gave him that pause where he had we always talk about stimulus and response. I'm triggered. Response, I'm going to drink. We need to widen that gap. He actually had that in the restraining order. And the inspirational piece for me is he fought, him and his wife, they fought for the marriage, And I think that is really important. I'm not saying we should stay in relationships that don't work for us, that don't help us grow, evolve, that we don't love the other person, where we don't have shared values. Look, relationships end for sure. Right. And we talked about that a little bit. But fighting for your relationship is really important. You've got to ask yourself and look in the mirror, have I done everything in my power to do whatever it needs to save this relationship before we call time? So inspiration, hope as well in that it's never over. But I want to talk about the shame piece as well. Bryan said a piece there where his wife files a restraining order. They live in Boston, but his family and everything that he knows and his safety is in Florida. And it was his friend that stopped him and said, hey, don't run away. Your father ran away. Don't do that for him. And he said it was the best decision he did, to hang around so he could be a dad for his child. That didn't happen to me. My dad, I would say, ran away from me physically and emotionally. Well, first of all, my biological father did. He ran away before I was even born. I've never even met him. My father, who adopted me, has been my father my whole life. I would say he abandoned me emotionally, but he didn't realize he was doing that. And he also worked away a lot. I did abandon my son when we went through the relationship split with his mother when he was 9. And what I mean by abandonment was I had a job that took me all the way around the world. And I didn't have the consciousness or the understanding or the self-awareness at that time to realize that he really needed me. I was a mess. I couldn't even look after myself. I didn't think about him. I thought he'd be okay with his mom. But kids need their mom and they need their dad, right? And here's the complicated thing around shame and around guilt and around life and around relationships. I look back at that decision and I do remember there were times when I was kind of weighing things up and there was a part of me that was saying, there's no way you just You've just got freedom, Lee. You've just got freedom from 19-year prison sentence, which was the rail industry, working for a toxic company. And now you're traveling around the world, seeing all these different places as a writer and an interviewer, doing something very new. You're earning more money. Your life seems to be going in a different trajectory. And I wasn't willing to give that up. And here's the hard thing. Even knowing now how much that hurt my son and how much he missed his dad, I don't know if I would make the different decision going back there. I probably wouldn't have given up my job. What I would have done is I would have fought harder for my time with him. I would have fought harder for it. There were times when I conceded to other people in my life and made decisions where the net result was I spent less time with him. I would have fought harder. So after hearing that with Bryan and having that conversation with him, I felt a little bit of shame today. The most important thing is that shame is a message. It's saying you stepped out of integrity. Okay. Now I can step back into integrity. And I've talked about this a lot this week in the Strive community and is my boy is 24 now. I can't do anything about the past. I am not the type of person who is going to let the shame drown me. I'm just going to feel it. I'm going to take the lessons from it. And I'm going to try to be as present as I can in my son's life from now on moving forward, right? So I want to share that with you. I felt a little shame, felt hope, also felt inspiration, okay? Now, where do you go from here? Well, if you want to learn more about Bryan, you can go to www.myrelationshipfail.com. You can take the free attachment style quiz there, and you can learn all about the personal development school and Tice Gibson, who does what was it called? Let me just look at my notes. Integrated attachment theory. Okay, so you can go do that. If you want to work with me, okay, if you want to work on anything to do with alcohol reliance, any bad habits, any other addictions you have, this podcast talking about relationships and improving your relationship yourself, then email me at thestrivemethod@gmail.com with the subject line relationship help, and I'll get in touch with you to talk about how I can help you with coaching, right? And lastly, a big thank you as always to our podcast producer, Stan, who is in Ukraine at the moment. And we all know how tough it is living there in the middle of a war zone, still bringing the show to us every single week, okay? So if you're looking for someone to produce your own podcast, drop us a line at thestrivemethod@gmail.com and I'll connect you to Stan. He's an absolute dream. Until next time, when I think we will be interviewing Lindsay von Wagner and talking about her book, Spiritual Vigilante, I bid you adieu, and I'll see you next time on the 1000 Days Sober podcast.